Uh, a small introduction about DataCode. DataCode is a leading organization in the field of geoscience industries, bringing cutting-edge technology and services to the industry, especially to the growing Indian market for over 25 years. Our mantra is empowerment of end user, enhancement of employees' skill set, equity of all stakeholders. Uh, this is my introduction. Uh, then here, a little bit about this partner in program. It is a team initiated with an objective to share knowledge on geoscience domain to the community for better reach of the subject. The session will empower students and professionals from the industry and thereby create a wealth of knowledge for society at large. Well, now uh, we'll see about today's speaker. Our today's speaker is Dr. V. Balaram. He received MSc and BSc degrees in chemistry from the Andhra University during 1974 and 79. He is former emeritus scientist and chief scientist and head of geochemistry division at National Geophysical Research Institute, Hyderabad. At present, he is working as project consulting scientist at Inter-University Accelerator Center in New Delhi. His research areas include trace element geochemistry, marine geochemistry, mineral exploration, spectroscopy, and environmental geochemistry. He is an expert of ICP-MS analysis and their application in different areas of earth and environmental science. In fact, he introduced ICP-MS as well as MPAS to the Indian Earth and Environmental Scientist community in 1987 and 2013, respectively, with several publications in international reputed journals. He has over 310 publications in international peer-reviewed journal with 4,700 citations, about 20 book chapters, and guided by PhD students, few postdoctoral, and hundreds of PG students from different universities across the country. He is recipient of several prestigious national and international awards, such as National Geoscience Award from Government of India in 2000, yes, Narayana Swamy Award from Geological Society of India 2010, Eminent Mass Spectrometrist Award from Indian Society of Mass Spectrometry in 2006, and many more. He made up to top 2% of scientists globally in 2020, according to the Stanford University list. So he was also the leader of Regional Committee Central Working Group for India for International Geochemical Mapping Program during 1994 to 97. He has popularized science by delivering 650 lectures in 250 academic institutions across India and abroad. He is also mentoring 67 DST inspired science camps all over India during the last 11 years. So it is my pleasure, sir. I welcome and please share your knowledge on deep ocean mineral deposit as a source of critical metals for high and green technology applications. Session over to you, sir. Please.
Thank you for a very wonderful introduction. I'll just share my. Yes. Is that all right now?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Yeah, visible. So thank you, the DataCode, Karunakar Rao Garu and his team for this wonderful opportunity to me. And I have been working in this area for the last maybe 20 years or so, in collaboration with NIO, National Institute of Oceanography, National Center for Polar Research Polar and Oceanic Research Center in Goa, and also some outside organizations. This is one of the interesting, though I'm working on several other areas, this is one of the very few interesting subjects to me, very close to my heart. So today's the title is the mining in ocean bed for critical minerals. So where I'll be why we need to mine oceans, then mineral potential of deep sea, then type of minerals available, deep sea mining technologies, then analytical techniques for in situ exploration and mining studies, also environmental issues, and what we must do in some publications and conclusions. So today we require lots of metals for our green technologies. For example, tellurium is required in solar panels, photovoltaic cells. For example, these are the solar panel inside material. Platinum is required for fuel cells to run our cars, aeroplanes, trains, whatnot. And also in our fossil fuel cars as auto catalytic converter, where these platinum, palladium, and rhodium convert the harmful gases into harmless gases. So all our small cars will have this kind of auto catalytic converters. The super magnets, like the magnets made of neodymium, which are used in windmills, wind turbines, etc. And now there is a big drive towards the electrical cars where you need a lot of lithium and cobalt. And even these platinum group elements, they are also used to make the cancer drugs, which are extremely important. And you can see a lot of many other applications. For example, smart flat TV screens, the paints, the electronics, and then the wind turbines, even the oil industry where you need platinum palladium as catalysts, then rechargeable batteries, LED bulbs, everywhere you need. For example, just you take only one example, take our mobile. In the touch screen, you need indium. In microphone, speakers, and vibration unit, you need these metals: nickel, praseodymium, neodymium, gadolinium, terbium, and dysprosium. Battery, as I was telling you, lithium, cobalt, and nickel. Then casing, magnesium, nickel. Then electronics, nickel, gallium, and tantalum, and a lot of other. So we have actually, I published this particular map sometime back in 2019. You see where the three-dimensional graphic illustrates the criticality of all 62 metals in the area of risk, environmental implications, and vulnerability to supply restrictions, etc. So, which means you can see all these metals we just now talked about are in this list, which means there is a great need for these metals. So, unfortunately, the land-based mineral deposits are producing lower grades at higher production costs, and new discoveries are becoming harder to locate. So mining of marine minerals would gain momentum in future in order to meet the growing demands for the metals such as rare earth elements, nickel, zinc, lithium, and cobalt. And particularly in the wind turbine, solar panels, which are in great demand these days, and electric storage batteries, etc. So if you look at our whole Earth, the Earth's surface is out of Earth's the whole Earth's surface, 71% is water or oceans. So only 29% is land. In fact, this is almost equivalent to the Pacific Ocean area. Recently, sometime back, there was a special issue by Time magazine, world famous Time magazine, and also Sea Power on the issues of the ore deposits in oceans, minerals from seawater, minerals in the ocean sediments, hydrothermal deposits, manganese-rich nodules, ferromanganese crust, oil, gas hydrates, mining issues in international waters. The UNCLOS, which was formed in 1982. So it is actually I think about 167 countries are members of this particular organization, and they have control on this particular organization has control on the ocean exploration, ocean mining, and other areas. If you look at the ocean basins, they are mostly covered by the abyssal plains, mid-oceanic ridges. Rates, leave alone gas and oil. So we will be one by one. These are the manganese nodules, which are on the ocean bed, on the subsurface of the ocean. This is the cobalt crust samples, which are on the flanks of the ocean.
Sir, your voice is breaking, sir. Balram sir, can you hear us? Balram sir, you muted.
Yeah, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, sir, we are better. Yes.
Okay, better. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is the.
So
Now it is
share the
clear?
screen again. Yeah, screen share is. Sir, you just
Screen
need to
share is not
this.
there? Okay.
No.
Okay. Now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So these are the seafloor massive sulfides, which are formed around the hydrothermal vents. They will be very active, very high temperature, of the order of 400 degrees centigrade. And these are the phosphorate deposits, which are used for making phosphate fertilizers and also extracting rare earth elements. These are mostly available on the slopes, shallow waters of the oceans. So most of the people, they for this, they don't require any international licenses. So that's why the phosphate mining is always the mining goes on. And if you look at the rare earth element potential of different oceans, for example, these are the Balram et al. And Nath et al. Are our research. You can see this Afanasy-Nicotin seamount in the Indian Ocean, 1700 to 2500 ppm of rare earth elements. The Indian Ocean, earlier we reported almost 1500 and 1600 ppm. East and South Pacific up to 22,000 ppm. Even Pacific in some areas, even 22,000. So it's extremely high. And the cutoff grade on the land resource is only 300 ppm. It's a bonanza, in fact, if you are able to mine it. And this is the distribution of mineral resources with respect to tectonic geomorphic setting. For example, in rift valleys, where you have the hydrothermal vents, you will have polymetallic sulfides. On the ocean floor, you will have manganese nodules. On the flanks of the ocean mounts or sea mountains, you will have the rare earth element rich manganese crust, or even it is called cobalt crust because of the abundant concentration of cobalt. So on the oceans again, it's manganese nodules. On the slopes, you have the gas hydrate deposits, and again on the slopes and also shallow waters, you have phosphorate deposits. So I think you will be able to understand better after this. We had a program, a collaborative program funded by the DST or now MOES now by the three organizations, namely NGRI, NIO, and the National Center for Polar and Oceanic Research Center in Goa. So the program is to explore this particular area, the south of Sri Lanka, which is called Afanasi Nikitin Seamount, for the cobalt crust and the concentration of these rich minerals. The world map showing the locations of three main marine mineral deposits. For example, polymetallic nodules are spread everywhere. Almost these blue regions are polymetallic nodules. And polymetallic sulfides, the orange color. So it is also spread across the whole world. And cobalt-rich crusts. So these are the cobalt-rich crusts, yellow ones. And the exclusive economic zone is this is an area of the coastal water and seabed within a certain distance of country's coastal line, to which country claims exclusive rights for fishing, drilling, and other economic activities. You don't require any, these white ones, no, which is nearer to your country, you don't require anybody's permission to do any of these fishing, drilling, or any other, even mining. But if you enter into the international waters, then you need to take the permission of the seabed, International Seabed Authority, ISA. See, please remember this Salwara 1, the near Fiji Islands, New Guinea Papa, the New Papua Guinea area, the north of Australia. This is where the first mining lease was given. But later on, of course, it was stopped. We will get into those details a little later. So this is the area we were trying to explore for manganese and iron crust samples. This is called Afanasi Nikitin Seamount at a depth of about 1.7 kilometers. Generally, at shallower places are the best ideal for the growth of the cobalt crust samples. See, our people, so these are 4 people from geochemistry, my own group. This is my colleague, Dr. M. Ram Mohan. All the 3 are my students, Dr. Savant, Dr. Subramaniam, and Dr. Parijat. All these 3 are at NGRI. This man is at NCPOR these days. He's working as a senior scientist at NCPOR, Dr. Parijat Roy. And this is the vessel we hired from Russia. It's a Russian vessel called Boris Petrov. And the sample collection looks like this. And these are the samples. The oceanic basalt sample. This is the cobalt crust sample. You see, on the basalt sample, the crust formation, it's a very, very slow, only kind of a 1 or 2 mm per 1 million year. So that kind of a very slow rates. But this is important because it contains very rich concentrations of rare earth elements, cobalt, etc. And we have also collected a lot of ocean samples to understand the water chemistry, particularly with respect to rare earth elements. Later on, I published this paper using those samples, rare earth geochemistry of seawater from Afanasi Nikitin Seamount in the north central Indian Ocean by high resolution PMS. And when we brought those crust samples to the laboratory, we used all analytical techniques like XRF, ICP, we analyzed them. You can see the iron and manganese are very high. That is the reason they are also known as ferromanganese crust samples. And we have seen the cobalt up to 0.9% and cerium up to 0.2%. We have also used a quadrupole ICP-MS for the determination of several trace elements, including all the rare earth elements. You can see high concentration of cobalt, nickel, copper, cerium is extremely high among the, even the other rare earths are also extremely high, but out of all the rare earths, cerium is extremely high. And we have used the most accurate high resolution ICP-MS. For example, if you want to determine gadolinium, there is an overlap of praseodymium oxide on gadolinium in a quadrupole mass spectrometer, this kind of mass spectrometer. But in high resolution ICP-MS, these two are clearly separated and you get extremely accurate data, particularly for the geochemical work. And we have also used ICP time of flight mass spectrometer available at Manuguru heavy water plant and also sulfur analyzer. You can see very high concentrations of sulfur and high concentrations of molybdenum. So high concentration of sulfur means the sulfide metals like cadmium, copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver will be very high. And we have used the nuclear reactor at the Sao Paulo in Brazil to irradiate some of my samples collected from the Indian Ocean. When I visited this place in 2009, we have used, she's my collaborator, Professor Maria. This is the Neutron Activation Laboratory. This is the reactor where we irradiated our samples and counting was done here. And these are the data which we already published in 2019. And the overall picture we published it in 2012 itself. The cobalt crust samples, how much cobalt is there and how rich these crusts are with respect to the rare earth elements. And we have even generated a platinum group of element data at NGRI as well as at USGS Menlo Park. Both the data correlate very well, and we have seen very high concentrations of platinum, and which we published in this journal in 2006. And now we talk about the polymetallic sulfides, which are formed at the spreading centers. So these, you know very well, the two plates, when there is a spreading and the new crust gets formed over here. In such places, you get these sea mounts, hydrothermal sea vents. Those vents are very rich in copper, zinc, lead, gold, and silver. And in fact, there are supposed to be about 500 known active submarine hydrothermal vent fields, and half of them were physically observed, with the other half from the indirect measurement of the water columns and other parameters indicated the presence of those other half. And in fact, it's a kind of, the modern ocean floor is an exceptional natural laboratory for studying process and environments responsible for the formation of ancient massive zinc, copper, iron, gold and silver sulfide ores, which are now being mined on land. Sometime back, millions of years back, this was the scenario even on land. Now it has become land. So the first such deposits were discovered in 1978, and particularly the chimneys will have extremely high concentrations of sulfide forming metals. So to move further forward, we will let us know a little bit about the plate tectonic theory and plate tectonic boundaries. See, these are the, you know very well, the whole world was divided into different types of the Pacific plate, North American plate, South American plate, African plate, Eurasian plate, Indian plate, like that. These plates keep on moving. This was discovered long time back by this gentleman, Alfred Wegener, but nobody accepted this theory And only after 30 years of his death, people got convinced and accepted. It was really unfortunate. And today, this is one of the top 10 scientific discoveries. And you see, these kind of events, the hydrothermal vents, so these are the dotted lines. These are the areas where you continuously get evented. These areas also experience a lot of earthquakes because of the subduction, spreading, slipping, and colliding of these plates. They sometimes they grind together and get stuck, and the pressure builds up, and finally they break loose. As a result, you get earthquakes. So that's why most of the earthquakes, 70% of the earthquakes occur over here in Pacific Ocean. So, and in fact, there are some countries which are on the plate boundaries. For example, Greece, Italy, Turkey, Iceland, even Taiwan. You see, for example, I was in 2011. I was sitting on an active volcano in Taiwan. You can see the hiss sound, and also the lot of water vapor coming out from within. So these are the areas where the mineralization also forms because of these activities. A lot of minerals get concentrated. A lot of metallic deposits will also form. That is our interest for the time being. And the polymetallic sulfide deposits, that's where exactly these polymetallic massive sulfide deposits are found at a water depth of about 3,700 in variety of tectonic settings. And the deposits can go up to 100 million tons, and particularly with respect to copper, zinc, lead, silver, and gold. And these minerals are dissolved in fluids at temperature as high as 380 degrees centigrade, and also at you go to the lower the sea levels, you get the pressure more at 350 bar means it's extremely high pressure. And if you have black smoke, it is sulfides. If you have white smoke, it is barite, barium sulfide. We had actually carried out some studies in the King's Triple Junction in the east of Australia, and we have, of course, published this in some time back, and we have seen extremely high concentrations of zinc, particularly the chimney of the hydrothermal vent gave very high concentrations of gold as well as silver. Silver up to 35.4 ppm. And coming to the manganese nodules, we have started with the cobalt crust and then hydrothermal sulfides. Now we are discussing the manganese nodules. These polymetallic nodules were discovered during the 1872, almost 150 years back. There was an expedition called HMS Challenger, which almost the entire world for nearly 3 years spending I think covering a distance of some 50,000 kilometers or something like that. And during that time itself, they have found out the importance of the polymetallic manganese nodules. So they look on the ocean floor, they look like that, and they will have lots of copper, nickel, cobalt, zinc, molybdenum, rare earth elements, and other precious metals. And they are on the abyssal plains of 4,500 to 6,000 meters, means 4.5 to 6 kilometers water depth. Accretion rate, I was telling you, would 1 to 10 millimeters per million year. And in the Pacific Ocean, where you have extensive tectonic plate movement, the growth rate will be much higher. And they are, in fact, as I told, nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese, and extremely high concentrations. They look like this, and we have a number of publications on this. And these polymetallic nodules also support life in the deep sea ecosystem. And this is a graphical picture of the content of the metallic contents. you can see that cobalt is 0.2%, copper is 1.3%, nickel 1.3%, manganese 27%, iron 8%. And the rest is oxygen, hydrogen, and water. And sometime back in 80s, our Indian researchers, they developed a ocean bed polymetallic nodule reference samples, which was collected from the Indian Ocean. And out of the 10 laboratories, NGRI is one among them. Other labs are from Indian Metallurgical Laboratory, Hindustan Zinc, Regional Research Laboratory, Bhubaneswar, Geological Society of India, Survey of India, Baba Atomic Research Center, Hindustan Copper, Indian Bureau of Mines, and NGRI. NGRI, I personally did all this work and then contributed data. Later on, I extensively characterized and published the paper. And again, I characterized that polymetallic nodule even for platinum group of elements and published the paper. Now we come to cobalt-rich crusts on the mountain flanks in the oceans. The very high concentrations, as I've been telling, cobalt, rare earth elements, niobium, platinum, bismuth, etc. And according to some estimates, 200 billion tons of these ores exist. And particularly, the China and Japan are applying for mining licenses. So, sometime back, James Heen, my collaborator, published a paper. So, in the North Pacific crust, the cobalt, nickel, rare earth elements, and these are the concentration levels. Pacific, you have more concentration compared to Indian and Atlantic Ocean. Then phosphorite deposits. Phosphorite deposits are very rich in phosphorus. These are all sedimentary rocks, usually composed of carbonate hydroxyl fluoroapatite. This is the formula, which occurs as nodules and also as crusts originally formed in the ocean environment. So generally, the three general environments, continental margin, seamounts, and lagoon and insular deposits are generally noticed. And the rare earth elements concentration can go up to 2000 ppm. Already Brazil, Canada, Finland, Russia, South America, they are mining, very extensive mining is going on. And ocean seamount phosphorates are having high concentrations of rare earths when compared to the continental margin phosphorites. So, and now we come to the gas hydrates. Gas hydrate is nothing but the methane gas surrounded by water molecules. And it appears, it looks like that. If you lit, it will catch fire. Means because of the methane gas. And we have on either side of Indian subcontinent, in the Arabian Ocean as well as Bay of Bengal, we have huge deposits. Millions of tons of deposits are there. And the whole, global amount may be up to 10 to the power of 18 meter cube of the gas hydrates. And somebody predicts that if you are able to tap even 15% of the gas hydrates, you can run the whole world for the coming 200 years. Means that is the kind of potential these gas hydrates have. And problem is, I will discuss this a little later. Now spectroscopy techniques in deep sea research. For example, LIBS, laser induced breakdown spectroscopy, Raman spectroscopy, near IR spectroscopy, laser induced fluorescence spectroscopy. All these techniques can be miniaturized, can be made very small and then deployed in a remotely controlled vehicles, so that you can send them to deep oceans, and then you can have the in situ data then and there simultaneously. Whereas in the classic approach, you have to go there, then take the samples, come to the laboratory, either on the land or in the ocean on the deck of the cruise ship, then analyze and then find out. But that is very laborious and also expensive. Whereas sending a robo with these instruments to the place where you are interested in, and then knowing the potential of that area is much easier and also cost effective. For example, Raman spectroscopy, which can tell you about the crystallinity and also the not only the metals but also the structure. And for example, it can detect if you have a peak at 2592, then there is a presence of methane hydrate, gas hydrate is present. So like that, you have a lot of advantages if you are able to send a Raman probe through a remotely controlled vehicle in the ocean. See, for example, a LIBS, laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy, there is a probe over here. If you send these probes through a remote control, remotely operated vehicle, you see this, for example, in Pacific, in Northwest Pacific, some of the areas where you have hydrothermal vents, the chimneys have recorded extremely, you see, these are the depths up to 1390, 1485, and the zinc concentration, copper concentration, lead concentration, even the chimneys have yielded very high concentrations of silver. Means gold also will be there, but gold cannot be detected. That is the reason gold concentration is not given here. And we have also nuclear techniques. For example, lutetium radioactivity, it can be detected. And fortunately, the lutetium concentration is directly proportional to the total rare earth elements. So if you plot the lutetium concentration and you get the and you get a linear relationship, which means if you are able to get the lutetium concentration, you can have the total rare earth element concentration also. Like that, they use also neutron sensor in the remotely controlled operated vehicle, a neutron sensor which can sense gadolinium concentration. Just like lutetium, no, gadolinium concentration is also directly proportional to the total rare earth elements. So you will have a clear understanding of the potential of the rare earths using these two techniques. Coming to the mining of the deep sea. See, this is the International Seabed Authority in Jamaica, one of those meetings over here. And a new legal code issued by the International Seabed Authority that regulates seabed mining in international waters is being adopted by 167 countries. In fact, this code will regulate the exploitation of the minerals such as manganese, cobalt, gold, copper, iron, rare earth elements, platinum for commercial purpose. So these are some of the machines which are used. It's a 25-ton robotic mining machine which was developed by a Belgian company. The goal is to extract the valuable metals such as cobalt, nickel, etc. And you see, this is the vessel. A remotely operated vehicle is slowly lowered this way and then sent to the deep ocean and sense the potential of mineral potential of that particular area. So the greatest concentration of these nodules is found in the area of international waters in the Pacific Ocean, known as Clarion-Clipperton Zone. Between this is the area actually between Mexico and South America. So this is the area which is very, very potential. In fact, they believe that there is a 54 million tons of manganese, nickel, copper, and cobalt put together. The polymetallic nodule mining is a theme diagram is given over here. They will send this is the vessel, and they will send a vehicle like this, and which will extract the polymetallic nodules and then suck into the vessel where they take away the valuable material, and the waste material is dumped back into the ocean. And this is one of the vessels which is being used by Spain. Yeah, now I will show you a video, a small video on how to mine polymetallic nodules.
More specifically, a nodule mining operation will involve a surface operation vessel. From that will be deployed a collector vehicle that will be down at 4,000 meters and it will be tethered to the surface operation vessel. Mining of nodules will produce two different types of plumes. One is a sediment plume created by the vehicle removing the top 10 to 15 centimeters of the seabed. We call that a collector plume. It will drive around and pick up the nodules. And they'll be pumped back up a riser pipe to the surface vessel. And the second type of plume is a discharge plume, which is unwanted sediment that is brought up to the surface vessel. It is unwanted, unneeded, and so would be returned to the ocean. The question is whether that's returned as a plume in the mid-water column or back down in the deeper.
Yeah, this is how things are done. And again, you see, in fact, these vehicles, they are almost like humans. They work in the oceans, particularly on the surface of the oceans. For example, this kind of a sea mine machine is working here in Spain, in south of Spain. Even in lot of work, not only on the minerals, but the people, a lot of universities. This is, for example, this is one of the publications in 2021, very recent. They are working on how the aquatic life in the deep oceans at temperatures of the order of 350 degrees centigrade, how the life exists and how the ecosystem works there. So that kind of studies are also done. Now, crust mining. You have seen the polymetallic nodule mining, which was relatively easy. On the other hand, crust mining, because these crust samples are very strongly attached to the basaltic rocks of the mounts, sea mounts. So it becomes very difficult to break them. But generally, they do the fragmentation, crushing, lifting, pickup, and separation. And it's tougher when compared to the mining of the polymetallic nodules. And according to some studies, this triple junction in the south of Indian Ocean, south of India, is the potential area in future for the crust mining. And this is one example. These are the crust mining material from the Hawaii Islands. So I was telling you about the extraction of gas hydrates. You see, you have millions and millions of tons of gas hydrates in the ocean bed, and they are very potential energy source. But the problem is, if you disturb the ecosystem there, the methane gets escaped into the atmosphere. Methane is 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide itself is now creating lots of problems world over because of the climate change and global warming. Even recently in Denver area also, in the winter also, there was a huge fire and destroyed thousands of homes. So if methane also comes out and acts with carbon dioxide, what will be our future? It's anybody's imagination. So it's that's the reason to tap this particular energy is becoming very difficult. Lots of countries, particularly China, Russia, Japan, even in India, at my institute itself, a lot of work is going on. But nobody has come out with a solution yet. And the India, there is one NIOT, National Institute of Ocean Technology in Chennai. They have recently made a personal sphere where two people can sit and then it can be lowered uh, uh, and kept for some time so that they can probe the underwater or the ocean surface for the mineral potential. They, in fact, recently they have done a trial of lowering up to 600 meters. But in future, they want to make a 2.1 diameter where three people can sit and then send to almost 6 kilometers depth. Very recently, the Dr. Ramadas, the director of NIOT Chennai, has revealed these developments. And one minister is hoping that ISRO will send a man to Gaganyaan and the NIOT send a man to the deep oceans, both simultaneously. So it will be nice if it is really done. And in India, as India is also a pioneer investor and continuing contract for deep sea mineral exploration under United Nations ISA. This vehicle should help India to harvest the resources and assist in the development of integrated mining system. So the concern now is the environmental impact. The ocean is there, the rich mineral deposits are there. We have the technology to take out, but the environmental issues are bothering the countries, like particularly the people like from China, UK, Belgium, Germany, France, Japan. They are the people who are coming forward to mine the massive seafloor, massive sulfides, ferromanganese crust, and polymetallic nodules. But the mining seabed carries a significant environmental concern. Millions of animals, tiny, small, big, live in deep ocean ecosystems and the connectivity to the rest of the planet. Environmental scientists feel that the planet is under great threat, even our oceans. Our deep oceans are not deeply explored and poorly understood. If we move forward before we have the appropriate information to manage these impacts, we would be losing the species, habitats, and many of the functions and services that life on this planet rely on. So the people are not really ready now. So a lot of people were given for mineral exploration, mining, exploration leases, not the mining lease. A lot of people have done. Several contracts were given by the ISA. But the first commercial enterprises was given to a company in Papua New Guinea, this area, in the Bismarck Sea area, to mine the mineral-rich sulfides in the deep water. And this is how the mining activity looks like. A lot of papers on the environmental aspects were published, which have created a lot of awareness among the people. And even the maritime communities living in those areas, in those islands, they started rebellion movements to stop the mining. And the approval was given, but again failed before the extraction phase. And therefore these people were asking to put a total ban on further seabed mining projects. At the moment, the mining activity stopped. In fact, the deep sea mining affects the microbial community. In a new study published recently, the mining impact, for example, the kind of biota loss was not recouped even after 10 years. The people believe that it will take more than 50 years to get it into the original status. The coral reefs particularly are getting affected very greatly. The coral reefs are mined because they are a source of limestones and other construction material. In some places, they are also used as bricks while they are used to lay roads also. So due to coral mining, metal mining, pollution, organic as well as non-organic, the overfishing, blast fishing, the digging of canals to get access to the islands and bays. So these are the whole things which are spoiling the, damaging the coral reefs. And also because of the climatic change, because of the increase in the carbon dioxide concentration in the environment, the oceans are becoming more and more acidic, which we recently published also in 2022. And as a result, as the acidity of the oceans is increasing, the coral reefs are getting damaged. So these are some of the important environmental. Some time back, we also made studies on the coral reefs of the Lakshadweep archipelago, where we, this side, where we were trying to understand the paleoceanic conditions using the rare earth elemental concentrations in the coral reefs. So, for example, recently, a British scientist recently found that an underwater mountain near Canary Islands, Canary Island means off the coast of Morocco, but it's a Spanish island. Recently, there was a huge volcanic eruption. It holds some of the richest deposits in rare minerals anywhere on the earth. But on the other hand, the Greenpeace and other organizations, they say that the seas provide half of our oxygen, food for billions of people, and home for some of the most spectacular wildlife on earth. But the impact of climate change, pollution, destructive industries mean they are in more danger than ever. So we urgently need to turn the things around. So these are the things which are very, very controversial. What we must do, the exploration and exploitation of these high seas mineral deposits is governed by the International Seabed Authority, as I told you. A better understanding of the deep sea is necessary to build mitigation strategies, proper enforcement of regulations in order to limit the environmental impact. And also baseline studies, comprehensive baseline studies are needed to understand what species live in deep sea, how they live, how they could be affected by the mining activity, and so on. And the deep sea bed mining is risky. If something goes wrong, who will pay for it? Even the David Attenborough, who made lots of environmental programs for the BBC, he is considered one of the biggest environmental scientists in the world. He calls for a moratorium on the deep sea mining plans. And this is one of the International Seabed Authority meetings. And some feel that the deep sea mining has no place in this modern age of sustainable blue economy. Seabed mining comes with risks, environmental, financial, and business political risks, which sponsoring states are required to monitor. Once started, some people say once started, deep sea mining is not likely to be impossible, is likely to be impossible to stop. Once lost, the biodiversity will be impossible to restore. So these are some of the things we have to think, the people have to think. These are some of the publications during the last 20 years or so, which I've been working on with the collaboration of NIO, NCAOR, and other international collaborators. So this is the recent paper. Very recently, it has been accepted, in which we have summarized the MCICP-MS applications in Earth means Earth and Ocean, and also environmental sciences. So it's a very big paper, very recently. And my other co-authors are Rahman Roy from the Polar and Oceanic Research Center in Goa. This is another paper, the sources and applications for rare earth elements, which was published by the IWA London, and the initiation and the editors are from University of Ireland. In this, I have given the ocean resources also for rare earth elements. So these are this man, my student, Dr. Parijat Rai, who participated in this integrated ocean drilling program sometime back, about 10 years back. Another student, Dr. Subramanyam, who is working at NGRI. This man is working at Goa and the Polar Research Center. This man is working at, he participated in the ocean drilling program of 2012. And these are my collaborators at NIO, Dr. Banakar, at Menlo Park, USGS, California, Dr. James Heen. This Geomar Helmut Center for Ocean Research in Kiel in Germany is one of the biggest ocean research center, very famous. Lots of activities throughout the year. So I happened to visit this center, gave a talk, Dr. Stevenson, in 2007. In fact, deep sea mining is a very important subject. Lots of international conferences are going on. Next year this year you have in France, and next year you have in Turkey. The conclusions, the deep sea minerals with respect to global economy suggest that seafloor massive sulfides around hydrothermal vents, cobalt-rich crusts on the flanks of seamounts, or the field of manganese nodules in the abyssal plains will be increasingly important to meet the deficit metals such as cobalt, rare earth elements, manganese, nickel, copper, etc. In addition to mineral deposits, there is also interest in extracting methane gas, that is gas hydrate, from the continental slopes and rises. And crust mining, as I told you, is technically much more difficult than manganese nodule mining. Manganese nodule mining is much easier. Recovery of nodules is much easier, whereas crusts are weakly or strongly attached to substrate rock. As a result, it's difficult. As I told you, that in situ analytical techniques such as LIBS, Raman spectroscopy, and some nuclear techniques are appropriate and useful for the successful exploration, mining of deep sea minerals to understand the ecosystem as well as the mineral potential. And many of the regions identified for future seabed mining are already recognized as vulnerable marine ecosystems. Several studies suggest that mining on the ocean floor could do irreversible damage to marine ecosystems. So we need to balance the need for metals and ecological impacts. We have to wait and see how the things will move in future. So I take this opportunity to thank Karunakar Rao ji and Dhruba Jyotinath, Vikas Piru, Abhishek Sen for this wonderful opportunity to me, and to all the participants, I wish a glorious future. Thank you all, and if you have any doubts, so I will be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, sir. Actually, I would like to start with Mr. Mundra's comment that it is very informative, and he had many queries, but answers he got his answers in last few slides, and this same goes back for me as well. I mean, there are a lot of things, a lot of questions which are coming in mind, like how these there is potential in nodules in ocean and deep sea floor in terms of metals that are there, but when it comes to mining, how potential it is. Is there any studies have happened for mining? Like what will be the environmental impact going forward? Because now ESG has also become a very important thing in the current scenario, and how industry is looking towards these new exploration areas.
People are very enthusiastic. People have the technology. People have the machinery. Particularly the companies from Japan, China, Spain, Canada, America. The people are ready, in fact. But the problem, I told you, the only one mining, a lot of exploration mining, exploration activities were done. License were given for exploration.
Yeah.
But only one mining lease was given long time back, in fact, 8-9 years back, but almost they were about to start in 2017-18, and there was a lot of problem. The people were demonstrating against it, and ultimately it was stopped in 2019. And afterwards, to my knowledge, I have been continuously checking the literature. No mining lease is given so far to anyone.
Right.
And people are particularly the big people, the environmentalists like David Attenborough, etc. Those people are strongly opposing, particularly Greenpeace. They're strongly opposing. And what kind of a turn in future this will take, I really don't know.
Yeah.
So Dr. Samuel had some suggestion or a question for you. Dr. Samuel, please.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I had a question. What is the opinion of ISAB or ISBA?
International Seabed Authority is for it because they get some kind of a revenue from that, about 5-10% of the revenue. International Seabed, that is the understanding. The International Seabed Authority is ready because they get revenue. But the environmentalists are not ready. So that is they are strongly opposing. I mean, they are also influencing the governments. So that is the reason things are not moving forward.
Yeah,
To my
I
knowledge.
think that,
yeah.
yeah, I guess I agree with you. In addition to Nautilus, there were actually a couple of other entities also. I heard a couple months ago during a forum here in US about this seabed, mining. As you said, sir, is the technology is there, but everyone is, even the mining company, they're also concerned about because of the lack of knowledge. We just don't know what's going to happen. Surface, yes, we kind of have a history of mining the Earth's crust. We just don't know about ocean floor what is going to happen because we don't know this unknown thing. That's the uncertainty. Just no one wants to take the risk. And
nobody wants to take the risk.
I guess one last comment. I guess all the geopolitics plays a big role in here. Whether it's allowed or not. I'll just leave it there because it's a sticky subject. But I was in a forum. I was like, it's better to keep mouth shut in here. It just goes.
The only thing is, see, we try to understand as much as we can the into the oceans, the kind of deposits we have and the kind of ecosystem we have. We try to understand more and more. That's all. At the moment. Sir, anything else?
Mr. Prasad, actually, we will share this. We have recorded this as well. So we are sorry that we could not cover the complete presentation, but we will be sharing this recording, this recorded session in our YouTube channel. So we will share that link. And
okay, thank you.
Wish you will go through. If there is any question, anyone else, please write it on chat box or you can raise your hands. Just in case hand raised. There is one question from Mayank. He is asking that in the presentation, sir, you have shown you have shown that rig. I think that the vessel is it the same one which he has also seen in which is which can reach up to 4,000 meters for collecting nodule samples. So is this the same one?
I have shown a video. I think it went almost close to 4,000 meters. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question from Nasimha Rao, sir. What are the reasons the mineral deposits confining to particular portions of seabed, like manganese nodules in abyssal plain and ocean mount, and gas hydrates in continental shelf? What are the main reasons and what is the source?
Source is seawater only. Mostly it is seawater or nearby vent, hydrothermal vents. They supply the required material or metals. For example, I also told during my presentation, the sea mounts, the shallower seamounts will be the ideal platform for deposition of the cobalt crust, the ferromanganese crust. I mean, a lot of research is going on. If somebody tells something and tomorrow they will, the other fellow will contradict those theories. But the source is seawater only or hydrothermal vents.
Okay.
Okay. Hmm.
Kauliya sir or anybody else would like to speak on this? I would appreciate some comments. Kauliya sir.
I too, yes.
Professor Reddy.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm there.
Sir, good morning, sir. This is
Good
Professor
morning.
Mallikarjun Reddy from Kakatiya University, Warangal.
Mallikarjun Reddy garu.
Yeah, sir.
Very nice. Yeah.
Sir. Just, I want to know whether are there any promising deposits for India in and around where our territory is extended in the oceans?
India, for example, in the international waters only we have, but again you require the international seabed authorities. In India, I see even the China has come as far as the triple junction in the Indian Ocean, and then did a lot of exploration work. The India, in fact, when compared to Japan and China, we are lagging behind, mostly because of the funds. So, for example, we could not get an extension of this project because of lack of funds. So, I will not totally say that India is lagging behind, but definitely relatively, when compared to the aggressive partners like, campaigners like China and Japan, so we are a little bit lagging behind in this. And you can see that the Spain and all other companies, the kind of vehicles you have seen, no, and the kind of vehicle the NIOT has presented, you can make a comparison and decide yourself the kind of progress we are making.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Right.
So there is another question from Mr. Rajkumar. He wants to know that formation of manganese nodules can be affected or helped by ocean current pattern.
Actually, I really don't know. I cannot answer, but I don't, because the ocean currents are on the surface, and inner currents are also there, but the manganese nodules are formed almost 4 kilometers down on the floor, and there will be currents there also. So they, in fact, those currents only bring in continuous metal for the formation of these manganese nodules.
Right.
Right.
So I can't see any questions or any hands raised now.
Yeah.
So, sir, I think we can close this. Thank you very much.
Thanks
for
a lot to all the people who are responsible for this wonderful program event. So I once again thank Data Code, Karunakar Rao Garu. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to all attendees and all presenters. Thank you very much. And we will be sharing another presentation for next month very shortly. Thank you very much. Hope to meet you again there in that session as well.